Well, thanks for being here so early. Um, I am going to spend some time with you all talking about innovation within existing companies, specifically how to think about starting new products or new business lines within maybe not an established company, but a company that's already on its way and is starting to establish its identity and wants to become more than just a single products company. So I'm going to start by telling you all about a phone call that I had probably about 18 months ago, where the person on the other line they were an industry expert, they were a consultant, one of many folks who I spoke with, and they said a phrase that I suspect that a lot of people who are attending this conference have heard, which is something along the lines of like that idea is just it's just not going to work. Here's why. I'm sure that's a common refrain for entrepreneurs everywhere. It's something we all get used to hearing. But of course, that was certainly not the end of the story. Otherwise, I wouldn't be up here. But it also wasn't the end of the phone call. It went on for another 45 minutes or so. And we talked about the ins and outs of what was going on in the industry, and specifically this idea that I had that I couldn't quite figure out if it had legs. And you might think that, I ended that phone call and decided to either ignore everything he had to say and just move on, say, forget that guy, or that I might have listened to him and kind of given up on the idea altogether. But the reality is that I kind of did a little bit of both. I decided to take the texture and the context from the conversation and put it in my back pocket, one of many phone calls where I was able to kind of collect data points, but to leave the sentiment and the opinion of that won't work behind as a way of doing this thing that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have to do, which is to have and maintain this like 90% belief that a thing will work with this 10% questioning of like, but will it, just to keep a fire lit. And in retrospect, this was one of a series of moments that in the moment didn't necessarily feel that consequential. But then in retrospect, I started to think about the past 2 years of building this company within Justworks, this new products line that ended up being far more consequential than I realized, and that I think paint kind of a bigger picture of the conditions that need to be true for going 0 to 1, either within an existing company or just on your own. So I'm going to walk you through the rest of those and the learnings that I had from them. Fast forward a little bit, and I had latched onto that idea with a coworker of mine, and we had just been piecing together, scotch taping a solution that ultimately was not going to scale, but it did solve a customer need. It kind of took this really acute and messy thing that a number of our customers were dealing with and put together a solution around it. But we were going into annual planning, like strategic planning that most companies do, where they figure out how they're going to spend their time the subsequent year. And I was kind of dreading it because the honest answer is I didn't feel like I was ready to make certain commitments or decide like we can deliver X by Y date. And the day before, I ran into a friend of mine in the kitchen, a coworker, and mentioned that I had to prepare for presenting at strategic planning the next day. And he kind of looked at me funny and said, like, but aren't you guys just like tinkering around? You're not really like building anything, right? Which I was a little offended by at first. But then I had a little bit of a light bulb where I thought, okay, there might be something here. I went back to my desk and I stripped down the entire deck, took out all the formatting, and reframed everything that I was going to present to the company as just an experiment, just something that we were tinkering with. And I made sure to highlight the value that we were adding to this subset of customers, but made it feel non-committal, made it feel like it was still an experiment. And so the next day I went into strategic planning, into the room, presented, tried to be very casual, which is actually pretty hard for me. I'm not a very casual person. But walked away and people just kind of said, great, like glad y'all are trying it out, thinking about it, helping out a customer or a handful of customers. And what that gave us was air cover. It gave us kind of space and time to continue to experiment until we were ready to go all in. And what it really meant was that we could spend all of our time building as opposed to what a lot of investments or innovation ends up getting killed by, which is long to do lists that are more about aligning with the rest of the business and making commitments to what you will deliver by what date. And so, what I realized in the moment was it was really important to frame everything we were doing as an experiment, still add value so that you could continue that experiment, but frame it as such so that you have that air cover and that time and that space before you're ready to go all in. Fast forward another 6 months, and that little Scotch tape solution had actually started to take off, and we were needing to hire a team. And so I got funding within the company, which if you all want to hear about that, I'm happy to chat about it during the Q&A. But after the commitment of funding, I felt like I needed to have this operating cadence. I needed to be able to show our CEO and our SVP of strategic planning like how we were doing every month, where we were, how much progress we had made. And so I put together this operating cadence, met with them. We talked through it, and our CEO kind of sat there quietly looking at it and then slid it back across the table towards me. And he said, "Thank you, Julia. I will talk to you in 6 months." And I was like a little taken aback. I didn't know what he was talking about. And protested a little bit. It was like, "Well, don't you want to know what's going on? I'll give you monthly updates. I'll tell you how we're progressing." And he firmly said, "I will talk to you in 6 months." And of course, he wasn't wholly unavailable. I talked to him frequently, but I talked to him so that he could help me, not to give him updates. And really, what that meant was that I had extreme focus and radical ownership. I was not spending my time kind of justifying decisions to our C suite or to other people within the business, and could really dedicate 100% of my focus to building with the team. And if that is something that, as a founder or as a CEO gives you like a little bit of anxiety, the thought of giving somebody on your team the kind of radical ownership to build a new product or a business without constantly kind of inserting yourself into the equation, I would really encourage you to examine that. I'd really encourage you to think about how, if you have the right bench of people, or if you yourself just need to exercise a little bit of trust and restraint. And if you're somebody interested in building a new business or a product within an existing company, yeah, full permission to use this as a proof point that radical ownership is incredibly important. Fast forward another 6 months, and we not only had built and shipped our MVP, we were really needing to hire and expand the team a little bit. So at this point, this was kind of mid-COVID. Our headquarters was fully closed because we were doing renovations, and of course, that was getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And so these new investments, the investment that I started, and then two other investments, had rented out a pretty janky loft in Chelsea to work out of. We felt that we needed to be in person in order to innovate as quickly as we needed to. And that first loft had gotten a little too small. It was the case that we had outgrown it, and we started looking for other similar spaces that were just a little bit different. The first space was had a slanted floor. Bathroom worked like most of the time, but not all the time, and it was above a club, so you had to scotch tape, well, really duct tape your monitor to your desk. Otherwise, if you came in the morning, it had often fallen over because the bass was so loud. So suffice to say, it was pretty gritty. And we went into these new spaces that were a little nicer, a little bigger, and we toured a couple. One kind of checked all the boxes. Boxes being like it wasn't above a club, so that was a real step in the right direction. And I went home after seeing all the spaces, and I just felt weird about them. Something wasn't clicking, something didn't feel right. And I went into our existing office the next morning, the one with the slanted floor, and was making coffee, trying to figure out what made the space special. Like, why did I care so much about the space we were in? And I saw a sign above the sink that one of our engineers had lovingly taped up there that said, "There's no dish fairy." And it was a gentle reminder to everybody on the team that there was nobody who was going to come up and clean up after them, both literally with the dishes, but then also with things like our infrastructure and our code base. There was like no cavalry coming to fix a thing. There was nobody who was going to do a job that was at the edge of their job. And so I took the piece of paper off the wall and brought it to the next office a couple of weeks later. And the team walked into the office and they walked into a space that just had a bunch of boxes with desks in it. And without pausing, they walked up to the boxes, opened the boxes, and they built their own desks. And then they built the next iteration of our product. And the thing that I take away from this in retrospect is that the environment that we were occupying had just a tremendous amount of impact on the mindset that we had. It might sound like a bit, I don't know, a bit cheesy, but like I genuinely believe that we were acting like the space around us. We were acting as if everything was ours to fix, everything was ours to own. And I think that that mindset was something that was incredibly important. And it made it so that nobody was stopping when their job was done. They were stopping when the job was done. Which, you know, at a certain point, you get to this level of maturity where it doesn't make sense to have a software engineer like figuring out how to set up a printer. It doesn't. But I would encourage everybody to push that moment as far into the future as humanly possible, because you end up with just a lot built in the meantime that you wouldn't quite expect. We had a lot of success. So a lot of that ownership and that feeling of collective agency, it fueled us, pushed us past our goals, and so it got us to the point where our product was not only built, but it was working. It was in the hands of a lot of our customers, and it was time to take our customer-facing teams, our CS teams, and our sales teams, and really start to leverage them to distribute the product and drive adoption. And we were sitting in all these rooms with these established teams that I've worked with for 6 years, that I have very close relationships with, and that believe in the products that we built and felt as though that it was an important thing for their jobs. But there was still this like friction, tension, weirdness where, you know, you all have felt it. We're in a meeting and you're like, why are we not getting each other? And we're having all these meetings and about how to take our product and really distribute it. And I got a Slack message, seemingly innocuous Slack message that had a doc, and the person asked me, it was internal, they asked me if I could take a look at this doc. And this doc was a proposal for how we should bring new products to market. Cool, fine, great, love the initiative. And I opened it and I read it, and I realized it was just exactly how existing teams shipped products. It was exactly how established and mature teams ship products, that involve months of planning and months of coordination across a lot of different parties. And I realized that they saw that friction and tension as a bug, and I saw it as a feature. Like I genuinely believed that the way that new teams bring products to market had to be dramatically different than the way that teams that had a whole domain that they needed to keep track of and to maintain, how they would need it to work. And so what I think people felt in that moment was that this was not intentional, and what I really tried to bring to light and make clear to everybody was teams that are going from 0 to 1, they have to work differently than teams that are at scale, and that will create that feeling of tension and friction, but that's part of it, and that's a good thing. That means that it's the system working. And hopefully what you end up with is this thing where the new teams, the teams going to 0 to 1, they kind of get pulled into maturity quickly. They get pulled into maturity faster than they otherwise would have. And it also creates this nice thing where established teams start to question, like, do I really need to do that step? Do I really need to go through that motion if it's not adding value? And so you kind of end up with the best of both worlds when these two different models collide. So we had a lot of success, and we're currently at the point where we're integrating back into the parent company or the core. And the interesting thing about all of this is that that first call that I referenced at the beginning with the consultant, that was actually not the start of this story. The start of this story was about 3 months earlier when I was on the phone with a customer, and we were trying to figure out what to do about this problem that they were facing. A really messy problem that a lot of our competitors had kind of turned their nose up at, didn't really want to deal with. It was too hard. Didn't know how to make any money off of it. And we sat together for a really long time trying to figure out this problem. And I had sat with that customer and quite literally like almost 100 other customers facing the same problem. And that was actually the conversation that started all of this. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about giving a talk on like why we chose the idea that we did, what about our business made that idea high leverage, how we thought about monetizing it, how we thought about the addressable market, like a playbook of sorts. And I realized, there's been plenty of ink spilled on that topic. There's a lot of books that I hold in very high regard about how to find a new idea and what a new idea looks like when it has leverage. But the thing that I believe about all of those books and about this talk as well is that none of it is really going to give anybody ideas on new things to start. And that really the thing that produces those ideas is being willing to sit in a problem for longer than anybody else, being willing to sit next to a thing that seems like it doesn't have a solution, next to a customer, and to sit in that and grapple with the fact that if you have the feeling that there might be something there, then there probably is. And that time spent with those people is the thing that earns you the right to, and that makes you the only right person to go and build that thing. So if you all take anything away from this and take anything back to your teams, I hope that last one is the one you hold on to most, which is really just that, by being willing to be that person and by being willing to sit next to a problem for longer than anybody else, that far surpasses all of the talks that you're going to go to over the course of this conference, far surpasses any kind of time you spend reading books or podcasts, and all good things, but things that ultimately are not what produces founders or really great ideas. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions from people in the room or online. I think I can see the chat here. Let's see. Maybe. Does not. Let's see here. I don't think those are questions yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten any questions online yet.
Okay. Any questions in the audience? Oh yeah, put it to the left side. There you go. Elizabeth says, how did you prepare the team for the tension and friction? Yeah, it was a lot of diplomacy. I mean, for my team, it's really demotivating to think that people aren't rooting for you. And so I had to remind them that everybody was, that they were rooting for the team to succeed, and that also finding the wins that maybe weren't as obvious. So taking things like for example, a salesperson using the products that we built to close a deal and taking that back to the team and reminding them that this was something that was not only helping customers, it was like helping people with their livelihood, is helping people close business, and taking those wins and kind of being like an internal, within my own team, kind of an internal hype man, if you will. And then I think that on the other side, it was a lot of having frank conversations with team leads where I asked them for grace and for patience and said, like, look, we're going to operate in a way that makes you uncomfortable. And that's not us being negligent. That's not us not caring about the impact that it has on your teams. That's us doing our very best to try to get this off the ground and reminding them, because a lot of these teams were teams that had been at Justworks for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, who do remember, if they like dig down deep in the back of their mind, they do remember what it was like to go from 0 to 1. And so reminding them how hard it was and just saying, like, we're in that space right now. Can you help? And coming from a position of asking for help, coming from a position of being willing to kind of ask and be vulnerable in that way, kind of put people, it was disarming. And so that tension kind of, not in a single moment, but over time diffused a little bit. It wasn't perfect, but I think we ended up in a place where it was just reminding people that we're on the same team. We're in the same corner.
You have another question as well.
Yeah. At an initial moment, how do you get new co-founders? I was super lucky on the co-founder front. I have a technical co-founder, if you will. He's our head of engineering. And he was a friend of a coworker. So he was not at Justworks, and he was looking for a new gig. And it was one of those like really amazing serendipitous moments where you have a phone call that's supposed to be 30 minutes and it's like 4 hours and you have no idea what you talked about, but you're like, I think I said, I shouldn't tell you all this. I sent him an email afterwards, but I was like, if you don't want to work on this, if you want to start something else, let me know. Like, it was one of those, we just wanted to work together situations. But I think that the conviction and curiosity is very palpable. Like, he could tell that I was going to figure this out, whether or not he joined me or not. And I think that when he saw that, he felt as though he had somebody who is willing to go through just a little more pain than he was. And that's like often the case what people are looking for. So yeah. Oh, and then the other thing on the co-founder front, this wasn't co-founding, but because this was a new business within an existing business, and as context, Justworks is 12 years old. So there are a lot of people who are at the company who were there when it was 1, 2 years old, who are now at a 12-year-old company. Very few people who like to be at companies that are 1 or 2 years old also like to be at companies that are 12 years old. It's not common. And so there were a lot of people who loved the company who didn't want to be at a company of that scale anymore. And they're awesome because they have like unbelievable context and unbelievable clout. Like, they have social capital that gives them a lot of ability to like move people in the organization. And so finding those people and actually recruiting them not only was a great retention tactic for high quality talent within Justworks, it was also a way to kind of put them back in a situation where they were doing their best work, put them back in a 0 to 1 environment, but with all of the like nice kind of safety and security that comes from being at a company that is, established and isn't having to go raise funding. So
To that point, how do you help your company build up its employees to go along with the scale from 0 to 1 to?
Yeah. I mean, I think about the portfolio of people on my team and how if I have a bunch of people who are very comfortable working in the level of maturity that we're at right now, I'm doing it wrong. I need to have some people who are very uncomfortable because, say, for example, I have a team and we're going 0 to 1. At least 25% of those people should be really annoyed at how little process we have and should be like pulling their hair out. They're like, this is too chaotic. This is too all over the map, because they're people who like to go from 1 to 10. And I need to introduce them before we're at 1, because they're the people who can kind of pull us into the 1 to 10. And can bring process when all of the people who are good at going 0 to 1 are like, do we really need to do that? Like, I don't really want to do the process thing. And then similarly, like I believe that you need people who are 0 to 1 people at companies that are, you know, at 1 to 10, 10 to 100. And I'm not talking about employees, just like relative scale. Because they're the ones who are going to look around and be like very annoying in meetings and be asking why we're doing a thing. And also, they're the ones who like cannot help themselves. Like they're like me, who I'm like, I'm just going to go build it, even if you're going to be mad at me for doing it. So finding people who just cannot help themselves and sprinkling them throughout an organization, and then also rewarding them. Like they're going to bother people because they're going to go start building without any sort of sanctioned go for it, you should do that thing. And so they're the people in and around them will often get frustrated because they make their jobs harder. And so you need to have leadership like reinforce that that was the right thing to do, and to publicly reinforce it, and to say, actually, like, yes, go do that thing, go act with, kind of extreme agency. Cool. Well, I know it's early, but I appreciate you all hanging out with me.